welcome to the first event of the Technology Network of the Berkeley Economy and Society Initiative. Thank you for also, I know there's Tech Policy Week, so we have a bunch of really competing events on campus at this time. But I am very glad, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Philipp Brandt, who joins us today from Sciences Po in Paris, where he is an assistant professor of sociology and a researcher at the Centre de Sociologie des Organisations, and I can pronounce it without an English accent. Philipp's research sheds light on how workers navigate and even exploit the gaps between the formal structures of work and its lived realities. He offers a powerful lens really on the transformation of labor in the contemporary economy. And what I love about his work is that it's very innovative methodologically in how it integrates qualitative insight with large-scale behavioral data. He uses computational tools to capture the micro-level unfolding of technological and economic change. He has applied this approach to a wide range of cases, from the early formation of data science to the inner working of a US Federal Economic Development Agency to New York City taxi drivers and immigrant workers in German firms. Today, he will be speaking about his 2024 book, Inside Data Science, Hackers and the Making of a New Profession. In it, he draws on the history of quantitative thought, a reflexive data science approach, and 3 years of observation of semi-public gathering in New York City's tech scene in the early 2010 to show how participants devised the technical machinery for seeing the world through data sets. I want to, before we move on to Philipp's presentation, I want to thank Jenna Huang, who helped organize his visit and who keeps sending you all of these emails, and of course the whole BESI team, who also makes this possible in a more invisible manner. So please join me in welcoming Philipp Brandt.
So fun to have Marion do the introduction, because suddenly I understand my own research much better than I did a couple of minutes ago. So this is on my forthcoming book. It's out in December, Inside Data Science, Hackers and the Making of a New Profession. Before I get into the talk, I want to acknowledge that by now data science has found its way into many different conversations with many different meanings and interpretations. It's one of the many technological changes from the last decade or so. It's a major threat to collective and individual life, and it's something that looks almost outdated now with the rise of generative AI. And I hope my study can help us engage with all these different concerns. But what I'm presenting here is evidence from research that started before data science made its presence in all these different conversations. So I want to start by presenting the argument that I make based on my research, and then develop that argument throughout the talk to eventually inform these conversations afterward. And the argument is, oh, there we go. The argument is that data science is public recognition. The argument is that data science is public recognition followed from relational discipline and reflexive creativity among scattered nerds and hackers in the early 2010s. And since it's the goal of the talk to develop that argument, I will keep it brief here and mainly focus on the two technical ideas that I mentioned here, relational discipline and reflexive creativity. By relational discipline, I mean three things. One, the interpersonal relationships between these nerds and hackers that are focused on in my study. Two, their engagement with technologies and tools and data sets as part of their technical work. And three, the bundles of relationships between them as a group and other groups they engaged with in the larger division of technological labor that they practiced in. By reflexive creativity, I mean that they not only reflected on the technical tasks they had, but that they also reflected on who they were in this larger division of labor, and then made the creative leap to step away from the existing understanding of that area of work and embrace this new idea of data science, whatever it is or whatever it was. So that'll be the goal for the next 40 minutes or so. I'm sorry, I'm still figuring out the clicker. To get to that argument, I want to start by outlining the puzzle, the specific puzzle that I encountered when I started the research, or that motivated this research. And to do so, I pulled out a simple count of newspaper mentionings of data science or data scientist from the Factiva news database for US publications between roughly 2000 and 2024. And what we see is that for the better part of a decade, there was hardly any mentionings of data science or data scientists, less than a dozen a year. And then we have a rapid increase around 2009, 10, 11. And this is not cumulative. This is just an increase of mentionings every year up until around COVID, when we see a small dip. But even then, the discussion of data science, a highly technical area of work, recovers in the broader public discourse, which rarely pays significant attention to complicated technical ideas. And so that itself is puzzling, but we can of course say, well, there's really an easy explanation, because around those years, we have engaging definitions of this technical area of work named data science, such as Josh Wales's, who was involved in a database company at the time, who tweeted that a data scientist is a person who's better at statistics than any software engineer and better at software engineering than any statistician. Trying to amuse his audience, to engage with this very serious discussion of data science in an entertaining fashion, mimicking the formal appearance of a dictionary entry when there was really none of that available yet for data science. He was still engaging with data science, but he did so in a clever way. There were more committed reflections, such as an essay published in an edited volume by Jeff Hammerbacher, who was one of the first Facebook employees, and set up the data analysis team at Facebook, and used the essay to reflect on the challenges setting up that team and how he arrived at the idea of calling his team data science to make sense of why this work suffered from a lack of guidance and clarity and what they had to figure out. So that happened right when there was a broader uptake of the idea of data science. But then, of course, some of you may go, well, Philip, that's really not as new as these cool definitions try to present it. And even these presenters knew that the idea of data science was around before, such as in this well-known essay from 2001 by Bill Cleveland, who proposed data science as an action plan for expanding the technical areas of the field of statistics, or even before in the late 1990s from a classification association conference held in Japan at that time, by a Japanese applied mathematician who proposed data science to invite his fellow applied mathematicians to recognize a little bit more the data analysis part that is necessary to do the mathematical or to do the math. And so data science has been around, but there was not really recognition. And you may go, well, Philip, but it really needed the larger technological changes that happened around this time, mobile computing, cloud computing, and all the financial resources that were poured into these projects for there to be an uptake. And of course, but that doesn't explain why suddenly data science was gaining attention, because as David Donahoe reminded the broader data science audience in a widely circulating essay in 2015, that there had already been 50 years of data science, quoting specifically an essay from 1962 by John Tukey on the future of data analysis, pointing out that even without the fancy label of data science, we already had the ideas, and even in a more rigorous fashion than these flimsy definitions that started to circulate on Twitter started to indicate. So the puzzle is really, if there is the idea, the area of expertise available. How did we see this uptake on a very new idea that of data science that really didn't bring any new area of expertise to this conversation? And it was not only in popular discourse on newspapers or social media. We have here Cathy O'Neill's famous book on the weapons of math destructions, how big data increases inequality and threatens democracy, which was written for a broader audience to make us pay attention to the dangers associated with the new algorithms and data technologies. But she also wrote it as a practicing data scientist addressing fellow data scientists. So what this shows us is, as we see this broader conversation, there is really a community of people who engage with this technical area of work and develop a sense of self-recognition around the idea of data science, even though existing scientific disciplines were available that had developed that expertise that data science now started to use. And that positions the problem as one in the sociology of professions and expertise, which I will not discuss at length here and now. On the last slide, we can go into that a little bit more. On the one side, we have the established view of Andrew Abbott's systems of professions, which is a high-level, quite formalized, abstract understanding where professions are entities with relatively clear boundaries who engage with conflicts amongst each other over problem areas or jurisdictions. And then we have had for a long time, but more recently gaining increasing attention, an idea of expertise that Gil Eyal in an article from 2013 evocatively proposed to replace the systems of professions idea because it misses what this line of research draws attention to, namely the more intricate processes, the interactions between experts and lay people, the tools they use as they develop and implement technical expertise, which gets overlooked in the more formalist understanding by Andrew Abbott. And my analysis will not adjudicate between those two debates. I use them to frame the analysis that I'm now going to present. And I'll start that presentation by focusing on what they both agree on, namely the existence of an underlying area of expertise. And so I'll here introduce the underlying area of data science expertise before I then connect the group of hackers and nerds back to the broader public conversation. And to start talking about this expertise, I tell you about how I first encountered that expertise, and that happened when I signed up for the first class with data science in the title taught at Columbia University in the fall of 2012. I signed up for that class to improve on my rudimentary technical skills from the first couple of years of graduate school, only to run into an entire collective experience, not in a small research seminar as I had gotten to know them in graduate school, but a large lecture hall where people couldn't find seats, where they came not from one discipline, but from all discipline on campus. And so I quickly moved from a participant all the way into the background as an observer, as I recognized this as a potentially interesting sociological problem to study. But it was hard to figure out what kind of problem it was, because if you remember the graph, there wasn't yet the clear puzzle of this gaining broad public attention. This was at the very early start of the conversation. We see that here in a newspaper article from the New York Times just a few months later, where one of the sources being interviewed is Rachel Schutt, who was the main instructor of the class I had taken a few months before, together with Cathy O'Neill, who's up here, who live blogged the class, which she co-taught with Rachel. Another person interviewed was Yuri Kim, who is also in the picture here as somebody who was in a quantitative methods master program at Columbia University and then signed up for this class to become a data scientist. She was one of the sources the New York Times turned to in order to figure out what was going on. Another one is Chris Wiggins, a faculty member of applied mathematics, who then became the chief data scientist of the New York Times as a side gig and has since published a book, How Data Happened, with the historian Matt Jones. And so being caught up in this development although I got excited about the social process that I started to see, I was unsure whether it would hold up for a dissertation and what kind of research project it would be. Why am I getting into this personal history? Because it gives me an important methodological context where I would not risk to falsely infer clarity retrospectively where there was no clarity at all. So now we have to withstand a little bit of messiness in order to get into this initial emergent phase of data science. And I was trying many different strategies to try to map out this problem. I signed up for office hours with Rachel, revealing myself as a sociologist who wanted to do a project. She was excited, met at a Think coffee place near the meatpacking district, near the Google headquarters where she worked during the day. And offering to make connections, getting me interview opportunities with her fellow data scientists in the community. I created lists where I collected information on tools being used, algorithms, data sets, companies being used, and so on. I went to events connected to data and data science, but all of that was tedious, and it wasn't clear what kind of problem I was seeing because there were all different ways in which the conversation revealed itself. So I wanted to gain a little bit more confidence, a systematic source where I would find evidence of this being a problem in the sociology of professions. And so I turned to job descriptions as a very light barrier to test if there was a more or less coherent conversation about data science. And I set up my in vivo coding project, got a stack of job descriptions, and found things like data expertise, skills, data exploration, hypothesis creation. I learned about the technologies they were supposed to know, and also that they were supposed to have communication skills and feel comfortable dealing with ambiguous areas. And that was fairly consistent. So I had my stack, but I didn't know what to make out of these consistencies and inconsistencies that I was seeing. So I started to follow what the data scientists were doing and getting so much attention for, and got a large number of job descriptions, namely as many as 2,000 as early as 2013 through the LinkedIn API for job descriptions. And since I was still a sociologist, I set it up as a comparative problem, also collecting data sets on attorneys, since that was the area of the professional role that we understood best in the literature, and also software engineers to have a case that's closer to the data scientist, as well as 40,000 randomly chosen job descriptions to be able to filter out words that people just used when they talked about positions. Now, this was quite early when sociology turned to textual analysis. That was before we had really canned versions of topic modeling, let alone word embedding analysis strategies or large language models. But I came from social network analysis, and I remembered an article from a couple of years before published in the American Journal of Sociology that studied email exchange networks. And it was interesting because it also took into account the topics that were being discussed in these email interactions. And I went through the article and identified two measures that could help me deal with analyzing large amounts of textual data. One was the so-called coefficient of variation, which measures the degree to which a keyword is associated with documents, being email or job post, across different topics, such as attorney or data scientist, and the degree to which, in the intratopic frequency measure, the degree to which a keyword is associated with all the documents, so emails or job descriptions, of a single topic, how representative it is. And I learned from the publication that I could assign these two measures as scores to words. And so this is a dot for each word that came out of the API in the corpus, and that I had to maximize one measure and minimize the other. So I took some cutoff and reduced the number of 8,600 words to 44 words that were supposedly, according to this strategy, representative of data science discussions on LinkedIn. And these are the 44 words. The first collective definition of data science from 2013. And I won't go through all of them in detail, but we see something that really fleshes out what the engaging Twitter definitions had already indicated. So we have up here hypothesis, we have multivariate, we have theory, all keywords that are associated with classical inferential statistics. We have up there natural language processing. We have unstructured, for unstructured data set. That was a cool thing at the time. We have Hadoop, NoSQL or NoSQL database languages and technologies that were really different from inferential statistics and much closer to the machine learning area. So that gave me some confidence that there was somewhat of a systematic conversation going on, not only in terms of numbers, and I apologize that I skipped the map. About the map, I was going to say that there was not only the coasts where I found these job descriptions, but also across the country. So we have the number of job descriptions around data science, and we have words that make sense. Of course, these are just job descriptions. You can fake them, it doesn't represent what people do, but these are not the most obvious words to fake. It was interesting for this very low bar that was trying to get over to establish this as a research problem. I was still skeptical because I didn't know if this conversation started in a very coherent cluster of this larger database of job descriptions, or if it was really representative. So I did one more step that I had seen the data scientists do, and it evolves around this idea of logistic, which in my original training refers to logistic regression, a way to analyze associations with a binary outcome, but that I had learned to understand as a classification technique thanks to the data science class. So really, logistic here is an intermediary object between these two areas of expertise about quantitative data analysis. And so I trained a logistic classifier on part of the data set using these words as features, which is the machine learning word for variables, and then in a test data set, checking how well the classifier does in terms of recognizing data science posts. And once the clicker operates, we have the result that shows for both precision and recall, which measure the share of correctly classified job descriptions and the share of job descriptions the classifier should have found. We see that in 2013, we have results that are as systematic for data science, iterating through the data set multiple times, as for lawyers, despite the multiple hundreds of years of history and institutional layering the legal profession could rely on. And both of them are much better than for software engineers, indicating that potentially my strategy was maybe not so good, but also being consistent with historical research that has found that as early as the 70s, software engineering had lost some of its intellectual autonomy to management once management started to compartmentalize computer engineering tasks into more specialized areas, undermining their ability to define a coherent stock of knowledge, which therefore couldn't have been recognized by this classifier, giving me some more confidence that whatever job descriptions are, there was a relatively systematic understanding across them of data science as early as 2013. Now, why did I make you sit through this if the evidence is only from job descriptions and even I recognize that's not the most sophisticated form of evidence? Because it is a cool exercise and it also illustrates data science expertise in the way I've set up this presentation. I've started out with Python program, with an open source Python programming language, which was widely used in data science and already occurred on the initial job description I showed you. I used the application programming interface made available by LinkedIn to have direct access to the data set. I needed some hacks to get the larger data set of random job descriptions, but it was fairly accessible at the time. I used a free version of the MongoDB database, which is designed for unstructured data. And in a response to the larger open source community, it made available one version that I could install on my laptop to help me organize these unstructured data sets. I went back into academic sociology, pulling out an equation from an article and translating it into code, to then remember from the lecture I had taken how what I learned to be logistic regression is really a machine learning tool for logistic classification to produce the output I've just shown you. So what this illustrates is whatever larger conversations data science is part of, whatever we interpret in data science, what is part of data science is really this kind of technical expertise that relies on existing socio-technical affordances. There were large communities of open source programmers that built these tools, and data scientists benefited from their work, but they also needed the technical skills to know how to use and array these different tools in order to be data scientists and cause all the problems or fulfill all the promises that we associate with them. So with this understanding of the underlying data science expertise in place, I now want to go back to the actual community of data science to figure out how they managed as a group to discuss these technical problems and at the same time build this idea of data science that could become widely recognized. And for that, I'm relying on what I call here design, but it should really be in quotation marks because it was only one of the exercises I did to comfort myself that I really had a dissertation project, at least until the time I defended. And to do so, I attended so-called meetups between 2012 and 2015. What are meetups? Meetups are collective events organized through a platform called meetup.com. It wasn't founded for the tech community. It was founded in the early 2000s to help people connect. Though many of the activities are leisure activities, dog walking, hiking, wine tasting, expat communities, you name it. And Meetup provides a platform. It never made any money, so it got sold and it doesn't really exist anymore in its original form. It made available a platform to help people organize email lists to communicate locations and times of these meetings. And data scientists used that platform for their purposes. And I signed up, eventually attending over 70 of these events, where I got exposed to over 100 speakers because some of these events had multiple speakers over an evening. These events were taking place during the evening, so I would leave the Morningside Heights area of Columbia University, get on the train to Midtown or downtown stops, and find myself in a coffee place, in the ping pong area of a startup, in a large corporate building, or at universities such as here in the Courant Institute of Mathematics at NYU, where going back through the homepage, I found a young sociologist sitting there taking field notes among all the data scientists following along as they were keeping up with the coding. I did not focus on data science events specifically. I attended events that were broadly engaging with data issues. Open statistical programming is still a very prominent meetup group. Data-driven NYC is also still around. It has become increasingly corporate. New York Data Science, MongoDB, the technology I mentioned. There were these different groups. Some of them only existed for a single meeting or 2 meetings or 3. And as I just said, others are still around today and thriving. And so up here is a graph I have shown initially to position this material, which was starting right after we see the uptake of data science, but during that time at the very early period. And I will now present evidence from these observations across 3 scenes from 3 different meetups. That's actually 2, but mostly it's 3 different scenes where I first show how they discussed their expertise as one of the mechanisms involved in generating broader recognition, how they discussed, as technical people, their position in the division of labor, recognizing themselves as a new occupational role, and then eventually their identity to figure out how they became self-aware to communicate and introduce themselves as a new role with a distinct name. And so the first piece of evidence comes from Claudia Perlich. That's her real name because she was and still is a prominent member of the machine learning community. She came to speak in the class I took at many meetups. Originally, she worked on cancer prediction, the cancer cell classification, but after emotional exhaustion, she changed to digital marketing, as many data scientists did after the financial crisis. and started talking about her work in digital marketing, which basically involves making people aware of products through banner ads that we know from websites or from applications, and trying to present her data science approach to this. But then, before she really got going, interrupting her presentation almost and saying, by the way, you really, really, really don't want me to optimize clicks. If you ever want to have a great click-through campaign, all you need to do is to show the ad on the flashlight app. It's a whole bunch of people fumbling in the dark. They will click on it eventually. What's going on here? We're talking about a time when the smartphones already had a photo flash, but no pre-installed application yet that would turn it into a flashlight. So smart programmers discovered that as an opportunity to provide a service and create an app that would do it, which they funded by making plays for banner ads. Now, we meet Hillary later, Claudia, was really supposed to put banners into these places that people would follow up on, that they would be supposedly interested in. In a critique of that approach, she comes up with this story where people are using a flashlight. They are not looking at the phone. They are not looking at the banners. But sure enough, because they are distracted, they will be clicking. Of course, those clicks won't lead to people buying things since they are not paying attention. But it will lead to people clicking on things. So if that is your interest, that you get clicks, you just put your ads on the flashlight application. She was discussing the technical idea of what's called a bad proxy for what people should really want, namely get the people interested in things they may actually want. And this way, rather than giving a lecture on causal inference, giving long equations and deriving them, she gives us an accessible story. Even though she expects this is a technical audience, eventually she reveals this is not how she would talk to her managers or clients. She expects she is talking to fellow data scientists, and yet she is presenting this problem, even though it's a complicated causal inference problem and statistical estimation problem, in this accessible way. She goes on recognizing that you cannot even do an experimental design because you cannot treat a person and not treat a person, which would give you average treatments effects, which is good for academics, but won't solve her problem, and eventually describing a machine learning solution where she has taken this issue into account and tried to come up with a solution that won't have as many clicks, it won't look as successful, but it is much more successful at addressing the problem. So she is giving us this story discussing the technical area of data science as a critique of the superficial interpretation of data science and discussing a fairly arcane technical issue without making it look technical. I should have copied that model before I designed my slides where I exposed you to all the equations and all the scores. But here we are. As a next scene, and now switching scenery, a different meetup, we talk about how they found themselves in the division of labor. In this one, I'm also bringing in a little bit more of the dynamics of these meetup events. Right now, I have shown you how somebody talks to a room, and this is really what these meetups were mostly about. People were perfectly happy sitting here there in the chairs, you know, catching up on emails, finishing code. Some were actually talking to each other, but it was a rare sight. The same afterwards, some stuck around. Sometimes there was pizza involved. Sometimes we still had to pay for the pizza because nobody knew what data science was good for. And so a brown paper bag passed around where we threw $5 bills in. But there was also more dynamic interaction going on. And this is where we will start in the next scene, where we have Harry, who speaks up from the audience during a panel discussion. So we will have a few panelists on the next slide. But here we are starting with Harry, who raised his hand and reflected on some of the conversations that were going on stage, noticing that he was finding, kind of on the front lines a little bit, that it's not just stress, it's almost like a territorial thing going on, a real conflict. Now, that looks immediately interesting because something is happening, and it's a conflict. It's stressful for Harry, but it seems interesting. It took me probably 5 times or 10 times revising those memos and the passages until I recognized this was really the most direct evidence you could get from somebody in the field of one side of the sociological debate I presented, because what Harry is telling us here is what Andrew Abbott needed 350 pages to explain, namely that there is formal boundaries in the division of labor around expert roles where they fight over problem jurisdictions, who is responsible for a problem, rather than negotiating that internally. It's about the conflict, and that's what we see here in the workplaces. And so Harry wants help figuring out what to do from the much more experienced panelists that he came to listen to. And he got reactions. So on the one side, we have David here, who was once again in digital marketing and who didn't directly respond, but shared his take, which was that it's about having a contract between what your data scientist does and what your infrastructure team does. Often, David suggests, he thinks it's the best of that form of that contract is SQL or SQL. What's SQL or SQL? It's a data query programming languages where you can define who has certain access rights to a data set. So this reiterates this formalist understanding of expert roles where they are so clearly bounded that you can undermine the conflict they have by defining in a contract, in code, who has permissions to do what. But his fellow panelist, Jeremy, somewhat interrupted and observed that every top data scientist Jeremy knows can code. What does Jeremy mean? SQL or SQL involves coding too. Yes, it does, but it's a very specialized form of coding that allows you to access data sets and obtain basic statistics, but it doesn't allow you to do the more sophisticated machine learning analysis that data scientists were really hired to do. And David senses what's going on. He agrees with Jeremy, fearing in front of the audience that he would look like he has a simplistic understanding of data science, but at the same time also recognizing what they don't need to know is MapReduce. What's MapReduce? It's a programming model that helps us scale statistical analysis to many cores to accelerate the execution of these statistical analysis, which was still a very complicated exercise at the time. He thinks it's okay for data scientists like Claudia. Who is Claudia? Claudia is Claudia, who we have just met, who was a well-known machine learning person, who was part of the conversation on that panel, and suddenly featured here as a person to point to define what data science is. So conceptually, we are seeing a major shift here. We see the initial formalist understanding of conflicts and fights, but we see a conversation about that in an interactive fashion on stage at a semi-public event where one of the advocates of the formalist view then reverses his position and doesn't say you need to spend extensive years with a fellow data scientist to learn what data science is all about, but you do need to know from the community who Claudia is and have a rough understanding of the sophisticated data science strategies that Claudia does. The main reference here was that Claudia has won multiple machine learning competitions, which is something these specialists do to keep themselves entertained or find jobs. So this moves us in the conceptual analysis really between the two existing positions in the sociology of expert work once we look at this emergent case of data science. And for the final word, we are going back to the audience where somebody else raised her hand, introducing herself as Kathy O'Neill, the Kathy O'Neill who probably went home to continue working on her draft Weapons of Math Destruction, which she eventually came back to present at the meetup, but at that point just sat a few seats away from me, listening to the conversation, and then adding to that, again from the audience, that she was a data scientist, and shared a piece of advice she was giving when people ask her about interview advice, that if they have an interview with a business who thinks you're an implementer and not a business person, then don't take the job. What is she talking about? She doesn't want to make data scientists more like business people. She is encouraging data scientists to claim some of the tasks they get assigned from business people to define those tasks themselves as Claudia had just done a few slides before, I'm not analyzing clicks only because you tell me to analyze clicks. I, as a data scientist, need to understand the problem from a data science perspective. So what we see here conceptually is, again, a more conflictual view. She's coaching the fellow data scientists to push back against people who want to encroach on that jurisdiction of data scientists. But we see that again in an interactive meetup setting where she is giving them rhetorical strategies how to navigate these situations. And with that in mind, we turn to the final problem, which is how they understood themselves and how they understood themselves as data scientists. And for that, we finally get to Hilary Mason, who I was already teasering a little earlier. Hilary Mason, it's again her real name. She was one of the major early voices in data science. She co-authored one of the first definitions of data science in 2010, together with Chris Wiggins, who was interviewed by the New York Times. And was invited to speak here at another meetup, so we are changing scenes again. A couple of hundred people had at this event come out to meet up after their regular work days to sit there in a lecture hall and listen to Hilary Mason. And what they get to hear from Hilary is that her reflection how when she started out at Bitly, at the link sharing platform, 3.5 years before, she insisted that her title was scientist because she was coming from academia. And she didn't want something to ruin her CV. And what she got was what she wanted to get, namely amusement and laughter from the audience, because all of them had come out to listen to her give a talk, as academics do. Talk about technical analysis, as academics do. She wasn't promoting Bitly as a product. Products were not promoted at these meetups. Recruiters were excluded from the meetups. She came to present patterns she observed of the Arab Spring events from a year before. And yet she made this self-reflection on how she felt insecure initially leaving her academic work to enter this practical area of data science. It was amusing for the audience because they knew what would happen. Namely that Hilary would become a highly successful person who continued to get invited. But Hilary didn't know that. When she first made the leap into the applied area of work, which didn't have the self-recognition yet of data science, which didn't have the community of people who would come together and figure out how to do ad prediction. To make that point a little clearer, we now have William, who introduced himself, "Hi, I'm William," and then said, "I'm a recovering academic." William was again a highly successful academic in a technical PhD program, highly prestigious postdoc program, and eventually made the transition through finance into data science. He came to present an institute he had founded to help fellow academics transition into data science work, and yet he remembered his own transition and how it felt like to leave behind the comfort of the academic institution, as crucial as it is. But it comes with the venues we are familiar with conferences, with classes, with colleagues who we can consult, who we can listen to double check if our analysis is sound and makes sense and is rigorous, where the problems are defined partly by the disciplines, and where we advance those problems in a discourse. All things the data scientists did not find when they first made the step outside of academia, using their technical skills from academia, but then encountering these problems that didn't have the institutional context. And what was important here, as a data scientist found the space in which they gained the recognition, was what I call an epistemic hole that they encountered, which comes from the idea of a cultural whole by Mark Pachuki and Ron Briger, which are contingencies of meaning, practice, and discourse that enable social structure and structural wholes. There was a real set of problems. The problems weren't new. The problems were very old. They have also been recognized before, but the recognition has always taken place in an individual experience, in interpersonal conversations, but not around a community that the data scientists started to build. We can trace this back when we go through the standard contributions to the history of quantitative thought, when we look at how statistics in England tried to gain scientific recognition, which it struggled with because it involved data on people, and that fact made it a political issue and not a scientific issue. Eventually, it got scientific status and allowed, for example, at Columbia, Giddings to make the argument for sociology to become a science. Why? Because it used statistics. Only for somebody in the technical area, Leo Breiman, to point out, maybe we should also consider data analysis, as we talk about data analysis, as a problem that is really one of two cultural sides of technical data analysis, only to gain major pushback in direct response to the essay that he published. And then eventually, of course, David Donohoe, who tried to reclaim the idea of data science, pushing back against the contemporary interpretation of data science, to recall that really it's not pure enough and we should continue doing what we have done all along. And as a nice manifestation of this community, I saw this poster at the beginning of this trip in Chris Wiggins's office with thank you notes to recognize his effort starting a group called Hack and Why in 2010 and running that group for 5 years, creating a space for the people to discuss the problems that have fallen into the cracks between science and practical problems. So, data science is public recognition, followed from relational discipline, interpersonal encounters and uses of technologies that guided the work, and also the recognition of bundles of relationships, together with reflexive creativity, the understanding of them being people in this division of labor, not only technical nerds, and making sense of their own situation among these hackers and nerds in the early 2010s. And to arrive at that argument, I not only analyzed these different data sets, I also engaged with abundant literature that have already made these arguments for different areas. There are excellent publications on data science, often interviewing the younger cohorts, following up on Hillary and Claudia. Then within the literature on professions, we have the familiar divide between Yale and Abbott, and now we have evidence from an emergent profession that seems to indicate that both are kind of right, and maybe it's about their case selection, why they don't see eye to eye. We have much sociology that pays attention to the relational processes in these dynamics. There are excellent studies on the open source and hacker community that I haven't sufficiently recognized here, but that is why the hackers are important in this argument, because these are hackers not in the evil sense of spies, they are hackers in the open source sense, but a specific kind of hackers, namely those that deal with statistical analysis and not only computer problems in general. And then eventually there is pragmatist theory that helps us figure out how people encounter problem situations and use them to arrive at new creative solutions, such as the idea that's called ourselves data science. This is, of course, a perspective that has, or the presentation covers a case that has changed since I've left the field. Today, I think we can learn from this case nonetheless when we develop ideas around an FDA for AI, for example, which requires professional staffing. This has also been a single case, which I've tried to make up for in the more recent research that Marion has mentioned. And if you want to discuss that, I'm happy to talk about my new reworks project. But for now, I'll leave it at that. I thank you very much and look forward to the conversation. There's a question. I think the microphone will come to you.
Thank you. Great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention a transition I observed during the period that you were looking at. I was a quantitative political scientist and came from an academic background. And I think the understanding had been that one starts with sort of a theoretical understanding, set of hypotheses, look for a data set, and then pursue the research. As data science emerged as its own field, it seemed to reverse the process sometimes, that people found a cool data set and started looking at that. And that the change in the usage of the term kind of encapsulated that for me. particularly when I was a graduate student, the use of the term data mining was a disparaging term. Oh, that's just data mining. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't have a theoretical understanding. Sure, you can run a zillion regressions and see what you come up with, but it won't really be helpful. And instead, data mining became a term of approbation. You were good at now, in the later period, being able to extract something from a data set that somebody hadn't found before.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much. One reason why the project has taken me so long is because I'm torn, as you could see partly in this talk, between doing qualitative and quantitative research. And in the course, and as a data scientist, we're also doing quantitative research. I never considered myself a data scientist and only studied the problem to protect myself from my own interest, but still couldn't help noticing similarities and differences as I was doing my own technical work. And having done that during the transition you describe, I was trying to figure out how it's not the bad version of data mining, how we still gain academic insight from that. And especially, I always had a good time, but how do I convince my colleagues and my committee and reviewers of this practice? And what I encountered as I was trying to figure out how the data scientists made sense of what they did, and as a semi-pragmatist followed up on my pragmatism reading list, I encountered in Charles Peirce's work the idea of abduction between deduction and induction. And so I got sidetracked from writing this book to work out an abductive approach in computational social science to still recognize that it's very rare for us that we really approach a data set without a theory. And of course, we can run millions of regressions, but even then, we probably have a theoretical expectations that led us to the data set, and that is just in which the data set is embedded. And to then recognize this moment when we see something that we didn't expect and integrate it into the research process where it has always been part and only written out at some point because Popper read it too late, maybe. And to position this abductive moment not as a replacement of the deductive agenda or the inductive one, but just as one step in the continuity. And so I agree with the observation, and that was my way of trying to make sense of that as I encountered it around data science. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh. That's me. Okay. I have kind of two directions I want to ask about, which may or may not be connected for you. So first, I'm curious about the demand side for data science. You started off with, I believe it was Chris.
Yes.
Someone talking about how this will make you, the students know this will make you a lot of money.
Yes.
The early data science, the papers on data science you presented all come out of Bell Labs. I was at Microsoft Research earlier. And then you had this scraping from LinkedIn where you pulled out job descriptions. And so just what the role is of the demand either from well-placed, well-endowed technology companies or others or academics and their role in shaping the profession rather than the individuals themselves. And then the second area is, again, going back to this money question, data science can make you a lot of money. You mentioned William transition from academia to finance to data science. And so what is the role, or how do they talk about data science as a profession, as a job, as something that will make you either money as a normal salary or a normal life, or how we might think about tech today as these moonshot ideas that are all about the returns.
Thank you. So the technical answer to the demand question is that the demand had to do with the technological transformations that I mentioned initially, but it could have been met by statisticians and applied mathematicians. So the demand played an enormous role, and the trick was, or the puzzle is, how it became met by data scientists. So how these people who were who could respond to the demand because they had the skills, how they figured out they create this entity, this unit, this community of data science. It was not only the demand, however, it was also, as I mentioned at one point, the layoffs of the financial crisis, especially for the New York perspective, right? It was a New York-centered analysis, and that's something else we can talk about, but they were in finance and left finance not only by choice, that too, but also because a lot of people were fired after 2008, 2009, and at the same time then were available with their skills and talent for the other areas that now had these large-scale data sets. I think it also backfired the demand because some of the demand was artificial as soon as data science became a thing, and startups brought on a data scientist even though they didn't have a data science problem to impress investors. And so that attracted data scientists that weren't really data scientists and still inflated the community in a way that wasn't productive to define the area of expertise. The money issue was, so as I said, recruiters were excluded at these events. At the events I attended, which is a small core set of activities, recruiters were excluded, and there was so much money thrown at data scientists that they were happy enough, given that the life stage they were in. They even found the time and motivation to start what's called DataKind, an initiative for pro bono data science work to make data science services available to non-for-profits or agencies that couldn't have their own in-house data scientists. It's not representative of the larger community, profession, or whoever calls themselves data scientists. So I think there's a lot of heterogeneity, but in this core group that brought together the idea, that defined the idea, it was a significant commitment to the technical problems they tried to solve.
Thanks for this talk. I lived through that era in this industry in that city and was like ready to have questions, but actually I just saw so much of myself in the talk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's weird to like have a talk of a history that you lived and to think it was so spot on.
Thank you.
So, but compliments aside, I'm curious, perhaps selfishly, how the sort of experiential process of working with these tools while writing about the people who work with these tools, right? Like it's not quite ethnography,
yes,
right? Because you're not, but the sort of embodied or cognitive process of doing the thing that you're also studying how other people do and live.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about that sort of methodologically, or if you've thought about that in the past, because you know, I'm personally very interested in similar.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, first, thank you for the observation. I mean, I was very glad when Chris Wiggins reached out when I gave the talk at Columbia. It was the most exciting professional email I've received across all my submissions and job applications. But that was really exciting because he lived through it like you, and I was nervous what he would say, and he had this stare that only an applied mathematician can have, and this pause after I said something where I thought, okay, he's now taking apart everything I've said. But his response was, oh yeah, I'm really remembering how I was walking through the snow on a Sunday morning because that was the only day when we had a room available to have these kinds of conversations. So this kind of feedback you just gave me is the most exciting part, because I too sat with them in the room, and I too was trying to find my footing in a professional world. It was a different kinds of professional world, but I was attached in my project to the data science project, which gets us to your real question. And so I've tried a lot, and I still do when I write applications, to kind of frame that in a kind of rationalized way. But I've also changed countries and institutional systems twice to do the work I do. And so through that, people stopped asking questions because I don't make any sense anyway. And I just consider it now as what the research process is. And in my case, it involved crossing that boundary. And I was glad after the book got rejected the first time that I found the patience to do it real and added a chapter in which I bring some of that, what I included in this talk, how I tried these different research directions and strategies only to encounter dead ends, that I included it into the analytical process, hopefully in a non-awkward way. And so I think I've moved on since then. I'm not doing another project like this. It's not my method. I don't think it's a method people should use, but it was what I needed to do to solve this problem. And the first time I thought I had a solution, I didn't really have a solution. And including reflections on that experience brought me to, I think, a more convincing solution. But it's just research. Yeah.
So funny enough, I also lived through this era.
Okay.
Towards the latter half. And so given my own lived experiences working in data science in New York and at Columbia specifically, there was movement towards the renaming of data science as decision sciences or becoming a decision scientist, or some language around the change of the name of data science. And so I was wondering if you could speak at all to just how impactful the name of data science is to specifically the statistical modeling that they are doing. I'm thinking about this also specifically in the fact that data science isn't as popular now as well. Machine learning scientists, NLP researchers are have a little bit more social capital.
Yes.
Even though some of the work can be seen as quite similar, sometimes the same. So I'm curious how much social cachet the data science name has currently, and if that's something that the scientists then in the work that you were doing were thinking about at all. It was something I experienced.
Yeah, very exciting. So so whenever I encountered a renaming effort, I looked away because I wanted data science to continue. But I think before we get to the cachet and what it does, I think there is a point that it took me a long time to recognize connected to your question, and that is data science compared to decision science or other specialized labels, that data is data is data. And so aside from what we impose in terms of meaning, just as something in the world from an actor network theory kind of perspective, from an STS perspective, there was this indirect link that brought together these introvert nerds that were the data scientists and allowed them to have a conversation without having to spend too much time with each other. They still wanted to spend time together. They still came out. And I could do the project because it allowed me to be an introvert doing field observations. So I'm part of that. But the data part is crucial because it could integrate a larger community of technical experts rather than cutting it down, narrowing the community around a specialized problem area like decisions. You can understand decisions through data analysis, but you can also understand energy problems through data analysis or medical problems through data analysis. Of course, you want to be very careful when you take one tool and transfer it to a data set from another area. That's why they listen to each other and ask each other questions. Often they still fail. That's why we have Weapons of Math Destruction as a book. But that itself was an important structural component around which they could create this community that covered a problem area. More recently, so I don't have systematic observations on what has happened after 2015-16. I've done some small studies on social media to keep in touch from a distance. What I think has happened is a few things, but around this idea of specialized titles, job titles and so on, that were more sophisticated machine learning specialized roles, that it does the work right, but it also undermines the opportunities to come together as a larger community because you're much more quickly part of a larger team again. You need to fit into the technological infrastructure of the team, and so that makes it less transferable. It might lead to more rigorous analysis, more robust analysis, It may be necessary for even larger data sets than they had at the time. But I think it comes both with benefits to be a better specialist and maybe even individual earning opportunities when you are at 10x something. But collectively, it undermines the opportunity to have this professional community.
Yeah, I think my question is a bit on the technical side, if anything, but how much do you think that technology is really connected to the, the exponential spike that you were able to observe? And let me try to explain, because I think, as computers became more powerful, right? I mean, the access to data was also exponential. And is that connected to your, observations, right? That technology really, developed this new field that we are now in. And also maybe as a background, I think that at some point, some of these tools were too technical to be like for people to use them, like it was a terminal, right? I mean, you open a terminal, you have your R, commands and a lot of knowledge, whereas now you have access to YouTube videos, a lot of tutorials that really help people to at least get a glimpse and perhaps start testing. So I think is it more connected to the technology, like access to more sources of information that lead to this new field in general, or is there something else that we,
Yeah. So I think this something else is what I've just spent the last 60 minutes on. But if you think about it as a total process, 60 minutes are very small. So I think it's 100% that a lot of what has happened is the technological change. If you want to quantify or think about it in a quantifiable fashion, what I've done, it's a very small R square that my analysis achieves. But it's a very small R square from a very, very big problem. And so a lot of this problem has to do with the technology, at least as much with the money. A lot with the institutions. Michael Bloomberg was a mayor of New York at the time, gave money to Columbia University to set up a data science institute. One of the largest meetups took place in the Bloomberg offices. The Obama administration hired DJ Patil, one of the authors of early data science definition, as the first White House chief data scientist. In that capacity, he could convene conversations about addressing technological change, advancing it, and so on. So I think I've left out a lot of major processes that are quite visible. Technological change, the way both the availability of data sets, but also the communication tools that people could learn from it, and so on, the money and the institutional context. All of that shaped this process, but it does not explain why we have this community of data science. There were other labels, other disciplines in place, which a much more robust historical footing that could have really initially benefited from this idea. And instead, they had to fight back. Statistics department had to rename themselves, only to then continue to do the same old thing and end data science on the trajectory that it was on. So this change within the data science trajectory, I think, shows the power of the sociological mechanism that started in these collective meetings, but didn't continue because there was no further institutionalization that could have further channeled these conversations.
Thank you. That was a great talk. I wanted to ask you, in terms of sort of topics, where does data science begin? Because you keep referencing finance. And finance is really the place where you have a lot of data, and that happens before the data explosion that we are sort of, familiar with through the social media, e-commerce companies, through the tech companies. Finance is there sort of earlier, and the fact that You just mentioned that one of the first institutes is created by Bloomberg. You know, it suggests to me that the financial sector is really key, and it's really key also epistemologically in terms of, you know, as we were just talking, you know, data science is also about a very different approach to statistics, which actually the financial sector found extremely useful. So I just wanted you to sort of comment, is that a wrong idea? Is that, you know?
No, I think one issue, so finance, because of the resources and the data sets, had people who knew how to deal with large-scale data sets, the so-called quants. Exactly, the quants. Cathy O'Neill was a quant before she was a marketing data scientist and then an activist and so on. I haven't been inside of one of these high-frequency trading labs or teams where they implement these analyses. I know from conversations how they bring in academics for enormous honorariums to tell them about new analytical techniques. My hunch would be that the field of finance, because its deep pockets and its highly specialized focus, its very uniform focus, what's the best bet, led to people knowing how to handle data sets, but also specializing this application of the technical expertise. And so it created the pool of talent, but I do think the very young tech companies that are now big tech, you know, just the invention of Google's search algorithm, I think it's a nice example how they used clever thinking and basically taking sociological ideas to the problem of internet search in '98 and without the resources of finance as graduate students and built a major technology based on data analysis. Similar at Facebook. The fun anecdote for Facebook is that Facebook at the time had an intern who had previously interned at Yahoo Research, and once a person encountered the problems at Facebook, called up the old supervisor at Yahoo Research named Duncan Watts, a tenured sociology professor, to double check if the name data science would be a good label. So we see this Yahoo, Facebook, where the people who have skills suddenly encounter problems that are not yet as well defined, finding themselves in the situation that is more really the practice. How do I make sense of my problem, where it's not finance, oh, I make more money, that's the sense, that's the purpose of my existence. What is actually the purpose at Facebook when we apply these skills? So I think it's the pool of people is a major contribution of science and to some degree the specialized skills. But then I think there was an important mechanism how that got reutilized due to the other technical transformations around it.
Oh, I thought you had a question.
Just a short addendum to that question. The addendum is maybe the data came first, and having been in Bell Labs in the ancient days, remember you had a uniformity of the market. So you had a bunch of phones, and the data sat there for years before anybody counted anything. But then finally people said, oh, we noticed the calls are bigger on Mother's Day. Mother's Day used to be the biggest day for phone calling, you know, so the data sometimes bubbles up long before the data scientist.
Yes.
And your comment about data scientists is so much more magical than data processing expert. My question is, I'm very interested in the AI regulation in FDA and that whole area, chatbots on and doing some research. Who do you work with on inference? Because there are some key pieces there that you fill in. When you highlight, for example, the SQL database, if you use that, that has a technical inference that leads to what, you know, one of the devils I know, Mark Andreessen, says software is eating the world. But most people can't trace back to where the individual is actually manipulated. And the manipulation that you would see, so I would imagine a Max Weber or a Carl Polanyi taking your data centuries ago and making an inference about this is how people are being manipulated. But few people can trace it back to the scene of the crime.
Huh.
And in your data, when you trace those pieces, have you got partners that you work with who have can say, oh, look, I see what you're saying. Oh, I see that in human behavior when I have a kid who is addicted to something. As we know, chatbots addict and how they do that, how you give unequal rewards. And it goes back to this in your data. I just think that's incredibly valuable. If you haven't got partners in there, just advertise it, because you have the data that most people are looking for to find the smoking gun of where the manipulation is coming from.
The manipulation, and so you're suggesting here in this qualitative observations, I found the source of.
I mean, that's like coming upon bullet casings in a TV drama. I mean, it's
I mean, that's why it became a book and not an article. So I'm not sure if it gets to your point, but what I was initially embarrassed by, that I didn't have a sophisticated observation or a sophisticated set of data science observations in the workplaces. It took me years to recognize the meetups in the first place as a systematic set of observations, because in the books I read about professions, nobody told me that meetups are the place where professions emerge. And so I had to start thinking for myself, and that wasn't easy. But once I had started to do that, that's what I thought, wow, that is really the place. And it was fear and luck that I was sitting between that. And it was then a lot of sweat and tears to get to that point and do the sociological interpretation. But if that's where you were getting it, I agree that this is an interesting time, especially given how much data science has changed. And it looks so different now, in part because of the self-selection of people. So once we have data science programs, it's an entirely different group of people who feel the attractions to the field. There is a clear promise of wages, not so clear anymore, but at least there's clear guidance what to do. And that changes how the field self-organizes. And having been in this very early moment and meeting those people who then started calling themselves data hackers, once data science got converted into a corporate marketing stunt, at least in some corners, was an enormous benefit for the scientific experience, because the moment was over so quickly. And it could have been, we can still reconstruct it, but it's a very hard exercise given how much visibility data science has in so many different ways. So that's my reaction to that.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time. Let me just remind you that BESI Tech has another event next Thursday. We have Cecilia Recap from University College London, so you're welcome to come back. And thank you so much, Philipp. Really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.